When Marcus saw the little girl running through the marble halls of the Metropolitan Museum, his entire world stopped spinning on its axis. Those eyes that laugh, that particular way she tilted her head when she was concentrating on something. It was like watching a mirror reflection of himself from 3 decades ago. But what truly shattered every defense he had carefully constructed around his heart was recognizing the woman who was chasing after her with gentle admonishment. Elena, the personal assistant he had loved desperately and who had vanished from his existence exactly 7 years ago without a trace, without an explanation, without even a goodbye that could have given him closure. Fate had just delivered the most devastating revelation of his entire life, a truth that would unravel everything he thought he knew about the past 7 years. Before we continue with this story that will take you on an emotional journey you won't forget, make sure you're subscribed to our channel because we share real stories about love, family, and second chances that remind us what truly matters in life. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to people who need them. The thunder crashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Richardson Tower that night in May, 7 years ago, with a violence that seemed to mirror the turmoil raging inside Marcus Richardson's chest. He paced restlessly through the corridors of polished granite, completely unable to focus his attention on the acquisition documents that lay scattered across his mahogany desk like forgotten promises. His company had just finalized a merger that would cement his position as one of the youngest and most successful tech entrepreneurs in New York's competitive landscape. But his mind was consumed entirely by something else, by her, by Eleanor Morrison. The 26-year-old woman who had arrived to work as his personal assistant 8 months earlier had accomplished something that no woman from his elite social circle, with their perfectly cultivated appearances and calculated charm, had ever managed to achieve. She had made him feel genuinely alive for the first time in his 33 years of existence. Their conversations that started as professional exchanges about scheduling and business correspondence had gradually transformed into the highlight of his increasingly monotonous days. Those precious moments when they would discuss everything from philosophy to her dreams of finishing her architecture degree at night school, from current events to the small details of everyday life that somehow seemed profound when shared with her. The way she smiled when he asked about her weekend projects, how her cheeks flushed that delicate shade of pink when their hands accidentally brushed while passing documents, the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes when she offered insights that often proved more valuable than those of his highly paid consultants. But there was one absolutely devastating problem that stood between them like an insurmountable wall. His mother, Victoria Richardson, had made it abundantly and crystal clear from the very first day Elena was hired that personal assistants were exactly that, employees who existed to facilitate business operations, and any romantic involvement whatsoever would result in immediate termination and professional blacklisting that would follow the offender for years. The sound of soft footsteps approaching down the hallway pulled him abruptly from his tormented thoughts and circular worries. It was her. It had to be her. Eleanor appeared every night at precisely 11 o'clock to complete the final organization of his private office. And tonight would be no different from any other night over the past months, except that everything felt different now, charged with an electricity that seemed to make the very air vibrate with possibility and danger in equal measure. Marcus felt his pulse accelerate in a way that was completely out of his control when he saw her appear in the doorway, silhouetted against the ambient lighting of the hallway, wearing her impeccably pressed business attire and her chestnut hair pulled back in that professional ponytail that somehow made her look both efficient and impossibly beautiful. Her large hazel eyes met his with that particular mixture of professional respect and something infinitely deeper, something more dangerous, that he had learned to recognize over the recent weeks and had been simultaneously treasuring and fighting against with every fiber of his being. It was desire. It was connection. It was everything they had both been denying and suppressing for months while maintaining the facade of purely professional interaction. The tension hanging in the air between them was so thick and palpable that it felt almost physical, like you could reach out and touch it, shape it, break it. Eleanor entered the office quietly, moving with that graceful efficiency he had come to admire, and began organizing the scattered papers with movements that betrayed a nervousness she was trying desperately to hide, clearly and painfully aware of the intensity with which he was watching her every gesture. Her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she straightened the documents on his desk, and when she accidentally knocked over the small crystal vase that held a single white orchid, both of them instinctively reached down simultaneously to prevent it from falling. Their faces ended up mere inches apart, close enough that he could count the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes, close enough that the world around them seemed to fade into irrelevance. Time itself seemed to stop completely in that moment of forbidden proximity and undeniable connection. Marcus could feel Elena's breath coming in short, shallow bursts that betrayed her nervousness and something more. He could see how her lips parted slightly, trembling with an emotion she couldn't name. He could detect the subtle scent of her jasmine perfume, inexpensive but utterly intoxicating in a way that no designer fragrance had ever affected him. Her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that completely disarmed every rational thought he possessed, as if she could see directly into the depths of his carefully guarded soul and accept everything she found there. For 8 long months they had been dancing around this magnetic attraction, pretending with increasing difficulty that it didn't exist, fighting against it with all the willpower they could muster, maintaining the professional boundaries that felt more and more like prison walls with each passing day. But in this moment, under the soft glow of the desk lamp and with the hypnotic rhythm of rain drumming against the windows as their only witness, all resistance crumbled and disintegrated like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Without speaking a single word, without breaking the spell with something as mundane as language, Marcus slowly lifted his hand and caressed Elena's cheek with a tenderness that surprised even himself. She closed her eyes and leaned into his palm as if she had been waiting for exactly this touch for her entire life, as if every moment had been leading to this one. The electricity that coursed between them in that instant of first intentional contact was so intense and overwhelming that both of them knew with absolute certainty that there was no turning back from this precipice they were about to leap from together. Destiny had seized control of their carefully ordered lives and was steering them towards something inevitable. What happened next unfolded like an explosion of passion that had been compressed and contained for 8 months of denial and professional distance. Marcus cupped Elena's face between both his hands and kissed her with a desperation and hunger that shocked him with its intensity, as if he had been drowning and she was oxygen itself. She responded with equal fervor and abandon, as if she too had been waiting for this exact moment since the first day she had walked into his office and their eyes had met across the expanse of his desk. They held each other with a strength and urgency that spoke of true love finally acknowledged, of soul-deep connection finally allowed to surface, of two people who had finally found exactly where they belonged in the universe. The social differences that separated their worlds, the family prohibitions that threatened consequences, the potential professional ramifications, everything dissolved and evaporated in that moment of pure emotional and physical truth. Marcus guided her to the leather sofa in his office, and between whispered declarations of love and promises that felt eternal and unbreakable, they gave themselves to each other completely with a passion that transcended any barrier of class or family expectation. That night, the rain fell over New York City like a biblical deluge, but inside the Richardson Tower, two souls merged and became one in a way that felt sacred and permanent. It was simultaneously the most perfect and the most intense night of both their lives, but it would also prove to be the last time they would be together in this way. The last moment of uncomplicated happiness before reality came crashing back in. Because fate and family had very different plans for both of them. Plans that would rip them apart with surgical precision, and the euphoric happiness they experienced that night of surrender and connection would carry a price that was devastatingly high and would echo through 7 long years of separation. At dawn, when Elena slipped silently back to her small studio apartment in Queens, neither of them could have possibly imagined that this night of forbidden passion would change the entire trajectory of their lives forever in ways both beautiful and heartbreaking. Marcus stayed awake until the early morning hours, reliving every moment, every kiss, every whispered word, every touch that had branded itself into his memory, feeling for the first time in his carefully controlled life that he had found authentic love, the kind that poets write about and that he had always secretly believed was just romantic fantasy. Elena, for her part, curled up in her modest bed with a smile playing across her lips and her heart overflowing with hope and possibility, dreaming of a future where love could actually conquer the massive walls of social inequality and family disapproval. Both of them believed with the innocent certainty of new love that they had found their forever, their happily ever after, completely unaware that the forces of family control and social preservation were already conspiring against them in the shadows. Marcus's mother, Victoria Richardson, had not built a technology empire and established her family among New York's elite by being naive or permissive when it came to threats against the carefully constructed social order she had spent decades establishing and protecting. At 65 years old, she was a woman who had learned through hard experience to protect family legacy and social standing with an iron fist, regardless of the emotional cost to those around her, viewing compassion as weakness and sentiment as liability. For 3.5 decades, she had managed with surgical precision every aspect of her only son's life, from his education at the most prestigious private schools to the careful curation of his social relationships and romantic possibilities, always with an eye toward preserving and enhancing the Richardson name and fortune. The idea that Marcus could become romantically entangled with a personal assistant from a working-class background didn't just offend her sense of propriety. It genuinely terrified her on a visceral level, representing everything she had fought her entire life to prevent. It meant potential social scandal that could damage business relationships. It meant the dilution of the family bloodline with common genetics. It meant the possible destruction of decades of careful image cultivation and strategic positioning. That's precisely why, when she confirmed her suspicions that morning through the observations of the night security staff she paid to keep her informed, she knew she had to act immediately and with absolute ruthlessness. There would be no warnings or chances to correct course. There would be no second opportunities or room for negotiation. There would be absolutely no mercy or compassion. The cancer had to be cut out before it could metastasize and destroy everything she had built during her lifetime of calculated effort. The confrontation occurred at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning in the main reception room of the Richardson penthouse, surrounded by priceless art and the trappings of wealth that were meant to intimidate. Victoria had summoned Elena under the pretense of discussing updated filing systems for the household accounts, but her intentions were entirely and maliciously different from anything remotely related to administrative matters. When the young woman appeared wearing her professional outfit and carrying a tentative smile on her lips, clearly still floating on the cloud of happiness from the previous night and completely unprepared for what was coming, Victoria felt a mixture of contempt for her naivety and almost grudging admiration for her audacity. Elena genuinely believed that love could bridge the chasm of social inequality, that economic barriers could dissolve in the face of authentic feeling, that class differences didn't matter when two people truly connected. How devastatingly wrong she was about to discover she had been. Victoria observed her for several long seconds in calculated silence, studying every detail of her appearance from her capable hands to her humble but dignified posture, taking in everything about her that had somehow captivated her son's attention and loyalty. It was undeniable that the young woman possessed a natural beauty and intelligence that had clearly enchanted Marcus, but those very qualities only made her more dangerous in Victoria's calculation, not less. Beautiful and intelligent women from lower social classes were the most threatening of all, because they combined the ambition to rise socially with the tools and attractiveness to actually accomplish it, making them far more dangerous than either quality alone would suggest. Victoria had witnessed dozens of similar scenarios play out among her social circle over the decades, and they all ended the same way: in scandal, in divorce, in financial destruction, in the collapse of carefully built family structures. The attack, when it came, was brutal and calculated for maximum efficiency and psychological impact. Without any preamble or polite social niceties, Victoria informed Elena that her services would no longer be required at Richardson Tower or in any capacity with the family business operations. The official reason would be listed as organizational restructuring and efficiency improvements. But both women knew perfectly well what the real motivation was, and the unspoken truth hung between them like poison. Elena attempted to protest, tried to explain that her relationship with Marcus was genuine and based on real love and mutual respect, not opportunism or calculation. But Victoria cut her off with a coldness that could freeze blood in veins. She explained with devastating and surgical detail exactly what she thought of this supposed love, describing it as nothing more than calculated manipulation by an ambitious employee who was trying to secure her financial future by seducing the heir to a fortune, a tale as old as time and as transparent as glass. She described with precise and cruel accuracy how she had been observing Eleanor's movements for months, how she had noticed the way she dressed slightly more carefully on days when Marcus would be in the office, how she unnecessarily prolonged cleaning tasks in his private workspace, how she manufactured opportunities for interaction. To Victoria, every single thing had been part of a master plan of seduction, and Elena was nothing more than a sophisticated gold digger who had temporarily managed to fool her son with an act of innocence and genuine affection. The humiliation was so intense and so complete that Elena felt as if her very soul had been ripped from her body and trampled. But the worst was still to come, because Victoria was thorough in her destruction. Victoria didn't simply settle for terminating her employment and sending her away. She needed to ensure with absolute certainty that Elena would never attempt to approach her family again, that the threat would be permanently neutralized. With a cold smile that never reached her calculating eyes, She informed Elena that she had already made several strategic phone calls that very morning before this meeting, calls that would have far-reaching consequences for Elena's future prospects. Her resume had been flagged negatively with every major employment agency and executive placement firm in New York City and the surrounding metropolitan area, marked with coded language that would ensure she would never work in any professional capacity for any family or company of significance. No respectable business would hire her as an assistant or in any position of trust after Victoria's carefully worded warnings about boundary issues and inappropriate conduct. Additionally, Victoria had contacted the university where Elena was pursuing her architecture degree in night classes, making substantial donations while simultaneously expressing concerns about a student who had demonstrated questionable ethical judgment in professional settings, planting seeds of doubt that could affect her academic standing and future career opportunities in the field. It was complete and total professional sabotage, designed specifically to destroy any possibility of social advancement or economic stability that didn't involve complete submission. Victoria had transformed Elena into a professional pariah with just a few carefully placed phone calls to the right people, leveraging decades of connections and the implicit threat of withdrawn funding and support. It was the power of money and elite connections in its most naked and cruel expression, and Elena realized with crushing clarity that she was completely defenseless against this kind of systematic destruction, that there was no appeal, no defense, no recourse available to someone of her social position. Her tears of impotence and desperation seemed only to fuel Victoria's cold satisfaction at a job efficiently executed. The final devastating blow came when Victoria handed her an envelope containing her final payment, calculated to the exact legal minimum required without a single cent of bonuses or recognition for 8 months of exceptional work and dedication. Along with the check, there was a letter of recommendation that was actually a carefully constructed professional time bomb, filled with ambiguous phrases that any experienced employer would immediately recognize as red flags and warnings. Victoria explained with almost sadistic attention to detail how she had carefully crafted each line to appear superficially positive, while transmitting exactly the opposite message to anyone who knew how to read between the lines of professional correspondence. How certain word choices signaled unreliability. How specific omissions spoke volumes. It was a masterpiece of character assassination disguised as professional courtesy, and Victoria was genuinely proud of her efficiency and thoroughness. She gave Elena exactly 1 hour to collect her personal belongings from her desk and vacate the building permanently, escorted by security to ensure compliance. If she attempted to contact Marcus in any way, through any channel, the legal consequences would be immediate and absolutely devastating. Victoria had consulted with the family attorneys that very morning, and they had prepared charges of harassment, attempted extortion, and emotional manipulation, all ready to file at a moment's notice. The message was crystal clear and unambiguous in its threat. Elena needed to disappear from their lives completely and permanently, as if she had never existed at all, as if the past 8 months had been erased from history. The power of generational wealth had won once again, crushing genuine love under the weight of systematic cruelty and the ruthless protection of social hierarchy and class boundaries. 2 weeks after the devastating termination that had upended her entire world, Elena found herself in the tiny studio apartment she shared with her cousin Sarah in the Bronx, feeling as if she had fallen into an abyss with no bottom and no light to guide her back up. The job search had become a Kafkaesque nightmare where every door slammed shut before she could even fully explain her qualifications or experience, before she could tell her side of the story. Victoria Richardson's poisonous words had created an invisible but incredibly effective network of professional blacklisting that followed her everywhere she went, like a shadow she couldn't escape. Every job interview ended with the same polite but final phrase that she learned to dread hearing. "We'll be in touch." They never called back, never gave her a chance, never saw past the carefully planted warnings. Her savings were depleting rapidly, evaporating like water in the desert, and desperation was beginning to transform into her constant companion, coloring every thought and decision with the gray tint of hopelessness. At night, she lay awake remembering every moment of that magical night with Marcus, questioning whether it had all been a cruel dream, wondering if she had imagined the depth of connection they had shared. But there was something else, something even more troubling that haunted her thoughts and kept her awake with a different kind of anxiety. She was 3 weeks late with her menstrual cycle, and although she tried desperately to convince herself it was just the extreme stress of unemployment and professional destruction, in her heart she already knew the terrifying truth with a certainty that made her hands shake. Fate had decided to complicate her already impossible situation in a way she had never even considered possible in her worst nightmares. The confirmation arrived on a grey morning in June at the free clinic in her neighborhood, where she had finally gone to either confirm or dispel her growing fears once and for all. When the nurse practitioner handed her the test results with a sympathetic smile that acknowledged the complexity written all over Elena's face, she felt as if the entire world was crumbling completely beneath her feet, as if the ground itself had opened up to swallow her whole. She was pregnant, unmistakably and undeniably pregnant. 7 weeks of gestation according to the dating. The baby had been conceived on exactly that night of forbidden passion with Marcus, the night that had marked both the highest point and the beginning of the lowest point of her entire life, the night that now felt like it belonged to a different person in a different lifetime. She sat frozen in silence on the plastic chair in the clinic waiting room, with the paper of the results trembling in her hands like a leaf in the wind, trying to process the absolute magnitude of what this meant for her future and for the tiny life beginning inside her. She had no job and no prospects for employment. She had no money beyond a few $100s. She had no family support system beyond her cousin who was barely making ends meet herself. And now she was carrying the child of the most powerful man in New York, the same man whose mother had sworn to destroy her life if she ever came near the family again. The irony was so cruel and so complete that it almost felt cosmically designed, like the universe had a twisted sense of humor. She had lost everything because of one night of love. And now that same night was giving her the biggest responsibility of her entire existence, a responsibility that would last the rest of her life. Marcus's child was growing inside her body, but he could never know about it, could never be part of this child's life, could never even know of its existence. The next months became a test of survival that would have broken someone with less determination and strength of character. Elena finally managed to secure work as a bookkeeper for a small family-owned restaurant in Harlem, where the owner, Mrs. Chen, didn't ask too many probing questions about her employment gap or her vague references, and seemed content with her obvious competence and tireless work ethic. The first months of pregnancy were especially brutal and challenging because she had to conceal the morning sickness and the bone-deep exhaustion while working 10-hour shifts to pay rent and save something, anything, for the baby's arrival. Sarah, her cousin, became her only emotional support and lifeline during those terrible months of physical and emotional struggle, helping with small loans when money ran desperately short and accompanying her to the prenatal appointments at the public health center where the care was adequate if impersonal. Every night, Elena would lie down with her hands resting protectively on her growing belly, talking to the baby about its father, telling stories about the wonderful man who had conceived this child with love and tenderness, but who would never be able to know about its existence or be part of its life. It was a heartbreaking conversation that repeated itself night after night, like a ritual of grief and love intertwined. It was a mixture of infinite love for the child she was carrying and devastating pain for the loss of the only man she had ever truly loved with her whole heart. As the pregnancy progressed and her body changed in ways both beautiful and frightening, Elena made the most difficult decision of her entire life, a decision that would shape everything that followed. She would never tell Marcus about the existence of his child, would never reach out to claim support or involvement. It wasn't just because of fear of Victoria Richardson's reaction, although that was a very real and absolutely terrifying consideration that kept her awake at night. It was because she had come to understand something fundamental and unchangeable about the world they lived in and the forces that controlled it. A child of hers would represent an existential threat to the social order that the Richardson family had constructed over multiple generations, a living embodiment of everything they worked to prevent. Victoria wouldn't be content with simply pushing her away or making her life difficult. She would destroy both Elena and the child to protect her family empire, and Elena had witnessed enough of that woman's capacity for cruelty to know she was capable of absolutely anything when it came to protecting what she considered hers. Furthermore, there was something deeper and more personal driving her decision. She didn't want her child to grow up being viewed as the product of the billionaire's affair with his assistant, didn't want the baby to carry that mark of shame and scandal throughout its entire life like a brand. It was better that the child grew up as the son or daughter of a hard-working and proud woman than as the unacknowledged illegitimate child of a powerful family that would never fully accept it. Her love for this baby was so enormous and all-consuming that she was willing to sacrifice any possibility of paternal support or financial assistance to protect it from the cruel and classist world that would reject and damage it. The beautiful little Lily Eleanor Morrison was born on a cold morning in February after 22 hours of labor in the public hospital, brought into the world amid the chaos and efficiency of an understaffed maternity ward. Elena had chosen the name with tremendous care and intention, Lily after her own grandmother, a woman of strength and grace who had raised 3 children alone after being widowed young, and Elena as a middle name to carry on her own identity and legacy. When she saw her daughter for the very first time, when the nurse placed that tiny perfect human on her chest, her heart stopped completely and then restarted with a new purpose. The baby was unmistakably Marcus's daughter, bearing his features in miniature. She had the same expressive eyes that changed color in different light, the same shape of the mouth that would probably give her his smile. Even the same small birthmark on her left shoulder that Marcus had once shown her. It was as if the universe had decided to create an exact replica of the man she loved. Simultaneously a precious gift and an exquisite torture that would last forever. Sarah cried when she held her new niece for the first time, whispering that she was the most beautiful baby she had ever seen in her life, perfect in every detail. Elena stayed awake the entire night watching her daughter sleep in the hospital bassinet, memorizing every detail of that impossibly perfect face, making silent promises that she would be the best mother in the entire world, that she would give her all the love she needed and more. She would be both father and mother to this child. She would make sure Lily never felt the absence of a paternal figure if she could help it, never felt less than because of her circumstances. This baby girl would be her entire world, her reason for existing, her masterpiece and her redemption. And someday, when Lily was old enough and strong enough to handle the complicated truth, she would tell her about her father, about the good and noble man who had conceived her with love but who had never known of her existence because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. But for now, for these precious early years, the secret would remain buried in the depths of her heart, protecting her daughter from the cruel world that had torn them apart so completely. 7 years had transformed Marcus Richardson into a completely different man from the one who had fallen in love with his assistant in what felt like another lifetime. The pain of Elena's mysterious disappearance had left invisible but profound scars on his soul that never fully healed, that ached in quiet moments. For months after she vanished, he had searched desperately for explanations, had hired private investigators who came up empty-handed, had personally reviewed every hospital record and public database in the city, trying to find some trace of the woman who had disappeared from his life as if the earth had swallowed her whole. His mother had told him that the assistant had decided to return to her hometown in Oregon to care for an ill family member. But something in that explanation had never rung true to his instincts, had never sat right in his gut. Elena had loved her architecture studies, had dreams and ambitions tied to New York City, and she would never have abandoned everything without at least saying goodbye or leaving some way to contact her. The fruitless search had consumed him during that first year, transforming the successful entrepreneur into an obsessed and melancholic man who couldn't let go of questions that had no answers. Eventually, he had been forced to accept the painful reality that perhaps Elena had chosen to disappear from his life for reasons he would never understand, and he had to learn to live with that void, that emptiness. But he had never stopped loving her, never stopped dreaming about the day he might see her again and finally get the answers he desperately needed. That Saturday morning, he had decided to take a solitary walk through the Metropolitan Museum of Art, something he rarely did anymore due to his constant business responsibilities and the demands of running a growing empire. His therapist had recommended activities that would help him reconnect with the world beyond balance sheets and acquisition meetings, to step outside the golden bubble of executive decisions and social events that had come to define his existence over the past years. It was a beautiful morning in September with that perfect early autumn weather that made New York feel like the greatest city on earth, full of possibility and life. Families wandered through the galleries with their children, young couples took photographs in front of famous paintings, and school groups moved in chaotic formations behind harried teachers. For the first time in a very long time, Marcus felt something approaching peace, felt connected to simple and genuine life that he had lost somewhere between corporate success and social expectations and the weight of family legacy. There was something therapeutic about being just another person among the crowd, without assistance or security or scheduled appointments dictating every minute. It was a freedom he had forgotten existed. And for a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what a different life might look like. Something simpler and more authentic and more true. That's when he saw her, and his entire world tilted on its axis. At first, he thought his mind was playing a cruel trick on him, that years of longing for her return had finally driven him to hallucinations and madness. But no, it was unmistakably her. Elena was standing in front of a Renaissance painting, more beautiful than his memory had preserved, with her hair slightly longer but styled in that same natural way, wearing jeans and a simple sweater that somehow made her look both approachable and stunning. There was something different in her posture and bearing, a confidence and maturity that hadn't been there 7 years ago, as if life had refined her without breaking her spirit. Time had been kind to her, had added depth and strength to her beauty without diminishing the qualities that had made her special. Marcus's heart began to pound so violently that he feared it might be audible across the gallery, might echo off the marble floors. For 7 years he had imagined this exact moment, had rehearsed mentally what he would say, had dreamed of explanations and apologies and declarations of enduring love. But now that it was actually happening, now that she was real and solid and just meters away, he found himself completely paralyzed, frozen in place as if all his muscles had forgotten their purpose and function. This was real. Elena was here, standing less than 20 meters away, and she appeared completely unaware of his presence, absorbed in studying the painting before her. But there was something else that captured his attention with even greater intensity and stopped his breath in his throat. A young girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, was standing beside Elena, holding her hand and chattering animatedly about the painting they were viewing together. The child had long chestnut hair pulled into 2 braids and an energy and enthusiasm that was characteristic of children that age, that innocent joy and discovery. Marcus watched her for several seconds with distant amusement, charmed by her obvious intelligence and curiosity as she pointed out details in the artwork to Elena. And then something hit him like a physical blow that nearly brought him to his knees. The girl's profile, the way she gestured with her hands when she was explaining something, the particular way she bounced slightly when she got excited about an idea. It was like watching himself 30 years ago, like looking at childhood photographs come to life. The similarity was so striking and so specific that Marcus felt as if someone had dumped ice water over his head and stolen all the air from his lungs. He observed more carefully, studying intently every detail of the child's face when she turned toward Elena to ask a question, seeking confirmation. Those eyes that shifted between gray and green depending on the light. That smile that was his own smile reflected back at him. Even the small birthmark visible on her shoulder when her sweater sleeve shifted. It was impossible. It defied belief. But it was undeniable and staring him in the face. That little girl was his daughter, his own flesh and blood. The realization hit him with the force of a hurricane, knocking the breath from his body. This child didn't just resemble him. She was unmistakably, undeniably his. The timeline fit perfectly and terribly. 7 years since that night of passion, exactly the right amount of time for a child to be born and grow to this age. Elena's sudden disappearance without explanation, her refusal to maintain any contact, everything made devastating and perfect sense in this new light. She had been pregnant when his mother had driven her away, had been carrying his child when she vanished, and she had disappeared to protect their daughter, to raise her far from the cruel world and the powerful family that had torn them apart so brutally. Marcus stood paralyzed in the middle of the museum gallery, watching his daughter examine paintings with the innocence of someone who had no idea that her entire world was about to change forever, that the man watching her with tears streaming down his face was her father. He had a daughter, a beautiful little girl who had been growing and learning and living for 7 years without knowing him, without receiving his love, without understanding that she came from a family that, despite all its flaws and dysfunction, would have cherished her unconditionally. The weight of that loss, of those 7 stolen years of her childhood that he could never recover, threatened to break him completely where he stood. But simultaneously, a joy so intense it was almost painful began to grow in his chest, expanding until it felt like it might crack his ribs. His daughter was alive, she was healthy, she was right there in front of him, real and perfect. Fate had given them a second chance when he had given up all hope, and this time he would not allow anything or anyone to take her away from him again. Would not let fear or family or social pressure separate him from his child. Marcus began walking toward them with steps that felt both too fast and too slow, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had no plan, no carefully considered approach, no strategy beyond an overwhelming need to be closer to them, to confirm what his eyes and his heart were telling him with absolute certainty. When he was about 3 meters away, Elena casually glanced up from the painting description she had been reading to Lily, and their eyes met across the space between them. The reaction was instantaneous and absolutely devastating to witness. Her face went completely pale, drained of all color, as if she had seen a ghost risen from the grave, and for a moment it seemed like she might actually faint right there on the polished museum floor. Her arms instinctively tightened around Lily in a protective gesture as ancient as motherhood itself, like a lioness who senses danger approaching her cub. Pure panic seized control of her features as she tried desperately to process the impossibility of what she was seeing. The nightmare she had feared for 7 years suddenly made real. For 7 years, she had lived with the constant terror of exactly this moment, had experienced recurring nightmares where Marcus appeared unexpectedly and took her daughter away, where Victoria Richardson destroyed everything she had built. She had meticulously planned her entire life to avoid any possibility of accidental encounter, any chance meeting that could unravel everything. She lived on the opposite side of the city from Richardson Tower. She worked in neighborhoods where wealthy people never ventured. She had carefully avoided all the places where she might run into anyone from her past life. But fate had decided that this perfect Saturday morning would become the most terrifying day of her existence, that all her careful planning would amount to nothing. Lily, completely oblivious to the dramatic tension unfolding around her, looked with innocent curiosity at the well-dressed man who was approaching them with such obvious emotional intensity. Her large hazel eyes, identical to her father's in every detail, studied Marcus with the frank openness characteristic of children her age, without any of the guards or pretenses that adults develop. There was no recognition, of course, because she had never seen a photograph of her father, had never heard his name spoken aloud, had never known that he existed anywhere in the world. To Lily, Marcus was simply an elegantly dressed stranger who had somehow made her mommy go very still and quiet in a way that worried her. But there was something else. Something deeper and more instinctive operating beneath her conscious awareness. A genetic connection that couldn't be explained with words or logic, a pull she couldn't identify or understand. The girl found herself strangely drawn to this man in a way she couldn't articulate, as if she recognized something familiar in him without being able to identify exactly what it was that called to her. She moved slightly behind her mother's legs in a gesture of shyness, but continued observing Marcus with a mixture of wariness and curiosity that broke his heart into 1,000 pieces scattered across the museum floor. This was his daughter, his own blood, and she was seeing him for the first time as if he were a complete stranger, which in every way that mattered, he was. Marcus.